Mets fans, I'm talking straight to you right now. Do not be nervous by the fact that the Mets haven't done anything in a couple of weeks. It's okay. Resist your natural urges. We're going to talk about it. Don't worry. Again, don't be a Mets fan right now. Resist your natural urges and try to, think on the positive side of things. It's okay to do that every once in a while. We're not used to it for Mets fans, but let's just try. Roll the music. Hello, welcome to Mike's Mass Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pashota, and a very happy Wednesday to you. It's been a while since I've recorded, but welcome to January 2025. This is the third year of our podcast, and it's great to be back. It took a little while to kind of think about what I wanted to say, and just kind of reflect, enjoy the holiday period, but now I'm back, and there hasn't been a ton going on in Met world, but there is a lot of rumors, a lot of speculation, most of it focused on Pete Alonso. And there's been a lot of debate on pretty much every Met-related podcast, SNY, internet, any social media. It is all focused right now on Pete Alonso. And Pete, we just don't know what's going to happen here. It does feel very much like the Mets are kind of waiting to see if the Pete Alonso camp, and particularly Scott Boras, is going to blink and say, well, what we have here is a situation where your client is just not really worth what we're expecting, what you think he's worth. We think he's worth, a lot, but not as much as you think it is. And that is where we are right now with Alonso. The very recent report was that Boras was floating out a contract offer that was going to be similar to Prince Fielder's contract that he signed with the Detroit Tigers, and this was about 10 years ago. And Fielder had signed a 9-year, $214 million deal, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's right. And it was worth about $23-something million a year for the average annual value. And reportedly, and this is not like definitive, but reportedly, this is the contract offer that Boras is floating out as a equivalent as to what he wants Alonso to get. And it's mostly about the years, because in terms of if you're going to do the math there, 9 years, $240 million, again, it's about $24 million a year. And it's not. It's a lot lower than what the Mets were reportedly offering. The 3 years, $90 million offer that they threw out. Listen. This was, delivered as definitive news. I do not believe that in the slightest. I mean, unless somebody from the Met camp says absolutely we offer 3 years, $90 million, I will never believe that they offer that contract. But let's say that it is in fact true. That is a major come down, and it turns out, and if that's the case, then if what Alonso is really looking for is just a long-term contract, 9 years, lock me up until I retire, I think that's something that they could do. It's weird that he offers that contract, because 9 years for Prince Fielder was obviously was a really bad investment on the part of the Tigers, who didn't even end up keeping him, and Fielder eventually retired well before that contract reached the end of its run. So it's not a great comparison point for what Boras wants and what Pete Alonso is reportedly wants. Again, this is speculation, but it's a 9-year, $214 million deal. If he wants the years, so be it. And I think the Mets could probably find an equivalent here as to where they could sign Alonso, give him a little bit of what he wants, but they're not going to give him a 9-year deal. It's not that contract aged terribly, so why would they ever come back to that? And the thing is that they're basically bidding against themselves. I mean, there's been reports, there's been like the speculation of, oh, the Giants might come in here, or maybe the Yankees come back to the table, and that's probably not going to happen. But maybe it's the Mariners, maybe it's the Texas Rangers. These rumors have come and gone. And it's really just the Mets at this point who are the ones that are interested in Alonso. I've said it before, Alonso and Boras badly misjudged the market for what Pete can bring, and Pete didn't have a great final year with the Mets, and that does play into the narrative, much as some people would probably say, no, that doesn't really mean anything. What you're going for is what definitive stats and what power you can provide. Listen, what you do in your last season is the most recent thing. It is a recency bias. Whatever you did last year, it does affect your value. And that's why Andrew Jones in 2007, after he finished up his contract with the Atlanta Braves and went to free agency, he was supposed to be this massive free agent, but he had a very not so great year in that final season in Atlanta, and it really did affect his value. And he had to ultimately signed a short-term deal with the Dodgers, which he wasn't really happy with. He showed up really out of shape, and that was another situation of a contract just not doing what, really looking badly. Alonso is not Andrew Jones. He's not a 10-time Gold Glove winner. He certainly has a lot of power. We can say that until we're blue in the face. Alonso is a terrific power hitter. He is not worth the money that they keep trying to come back to the table with. And the one thing I see in this case is probably him having to ultimately suck it up and sign a short-term deal, or he's going to have to come down on his price, and that is it's going to be either or in the situation. And I don't want like a unhappy Alonso. What I would say is probably the worst possible thing that could happen with the Mets and Alonso is Alonso shows up into 2025 feeling dejected, annoyed, upset, out of shape, wasn't working as hard as he should have been in the offseason because he wasn't sure where he was going to be signing, and all these things that could happen. And I think that would be a really bad situation for the Mets to have Alonso come back, but in low spirits and kind of affecting the clubhouse at that point. So they have to come up with a happy medium. There has to be a compromise here. The Mets and Pete Alonso have to come to an agreement here as to what they want to do, and one of these sides is going to blink first. And it's not going to be them. I don't think the Mets are the ones that are going to do it. It just doesn't seem to be the case. The Alonso just has no real competitive offers or anything remotely close to what he wants, and it's looking more and more like he's going to have to sign a deal that would be a lot smaller than what he was originally hoping for. So more to come on that. As to when it's going to happen, I have no deal. I have really no idea because the problem with having Scott Boras in these situations is that Boras is just going to wait as long as possible, and then it could be spring training, it could be April, it could be May. Who knows? Who knows when they're eventually just going to say, all right, we'll sign whatever contract you're going to come up with, because Boras will just wait it out as long as possible, and it's not good for. It's not good for the Mets. It's not good for really anybody if the Mets are not ultimately the team that's going to sign him. Although if I'm not 100% sure that's going to happen, I'm like 95% sure though. There is really no market for him, and I just don't see it happening. But moving on to other news, we recently celebrated the anniversary of a very important transaction in Mets history. In January 6th, the Mets completed a massive trade, and I know you're all are thinking, and that's exactly what I'm going to say. So we're really thinking on the same page here, and that is, of course, the trade the Mets made for J.D. Davis. And no, that was not the case. It was the trade for Francisco Lindor in 2021, and that brought Lindor to New York in a trade that sent him in exchange for Andres Gimenez and also Ahmad Rosario, and also brought Carlos Carrasco over to the Mets. But of course, Lindor was going to be the major acquisition in that trade, and it's been a crazy almost 4 years now, actually 4 years exactly. It has now been 4 years that we've had Lindor, and it as everyone will recall, and they should recall, it started off badly. It was very much headed towards a situation where people were thinking, okay, we may have just acquired another Jason Bay. Thankfully, things took a turn. We are all very happy of the way it did turn out. Lindor has emerged into, surprisingly, not an all-star. This guy who just finished second MVP voting, he cannot make an all-star team since he arrived in New York, and that's just based on Lindor just heating up mostly in the second half of seasons and just being his stats being relatively minor in comparison to other players that play his position in the National League. But God, it's still crazy that this guy cannot find his way onto an all-star team. But let's let that lie for a minute. Let's really acknowledge what Lindor has done since coming over here. And he left a situation in Cleveland where he was undoubtedly the biggest star on that team, but had Jose Ramirez, a rising star on his own, coming up, and Cleveland felt that was probably the best move, was just trade off Lindor before he hit free agency, get something out of it. In comparison to what the Mets were offering, I feel like it was still a steal. As good as Jimenez has been for Cleveland, they ultimately didn't keep Rosario, so that's really out. The Mets got Carlos Carrasco, who for at least 1 year was pretty good, but ultimately didn't really do that much for them. But Lindor has emerged into an MVP candidate, a legitimate megastar. He has shot back up in terms of people's thinking of him, because when he came over, that they had a very very pedestrian 2021 season. There was a lot of off the field stuff that was going on. Fights with Jeff McNeil. Flipping off the fans. It was rough, and during that time period, Lindor took his punches as much as possible, but you could tell it was affecting him, and to see him really flourish and become so embraced by the Citi Field faithful, it's been really fun to watch that evolution. I really do enjoy everything Lindor does. He's become just, after an epic postseason run, and especially that run in the second half, Lindor has put the Mets on his back, and he has become a favorite son of Flushing, and that's something to be said. It didn't look like it was going to be that way for a period of time, but there's, I would say that he should be in the running for captain, and that's pretty crazy to say for somebody who didn't start his run with the Mets, but is coming in, and I would say assuredly has been the leader of that team. He is, besides the fact that he was the best player on the team last season, he is a galvanizing force for that clubhouse. I think everybody kind of rallies around him, and they understand that he is the leader, he's the general in that infield, and as the leadoff hitter, was spectacular. So everything kind of runs through Lindor, and it's been amazing 4 years to watch, and I can't wait to see what he does in 2025. So we're very, very happy with Francisco Lindor as our starting shortstop in New York Mets land. So once again, congratulations for Francisco Lindor, 4 years here, and we're gonna very happily enjoy him till the day he retires. So that's that. Moving on. Actually, let's take a break right there. All right, coming back now. So we do not see a lot of activity happening with the Mets in terms of transactions. There hasn't been a major transaction since Sean Manaea was signed right before Christmas. That was a big deal, signing Manaea, but it's been pretty absent of big news, and people were waiting for something big to happen, and maybe thinking, okay, maybe the Mets have packed it in, they're done. They're definitely not done. But we do know the Mets are going to be going in for a number of relievers. They still have a lot of work to do in that bullpen, particularly in the late innings. So they have to acquire namely a lefty. That would be the biggest move for them. There are a lot of left-handed options available. Premier relievers, guys who are good. I've been looking at AJ Minter as a guy who should be targeting in terms of bringing him in. Of course, the top target would be Tanner Scott, the left-hander, most recently with the Miami Marlins. And Scott had a fantastic 2024. I mean, really amazing stats. So Scott finished the year with a 1.75 ERA, 84 strikeouts and 72 innings pitched, completed 22 saves. The numbers were just outstanding across the board. The walks are a little bit high, but that's usually not a problem for the Mets, who generally target relievers who don't really have great control, great command, but it hasn't stopped them from going out and targeting those guys. So I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in Scott. The speculation right now would be a short-term deal, probably with a very high AAV. So, I mean, if you're looking at what Scott's value is on the market, he's one of, if not the premier relievers still available. You got to look at him as a guy who's probably going to be worth in the neighborhood of probably, let's say, 2 years, $30 million at least. Edwin Diaz's contract was obviously very large. They're paying Diaz a lot of money. Scott is around that level. He wasn't as good as Diaz was when he hit free agency, but was still extremely good. And you've got to look at him as a legitimate target for the Mets, who need a stabilizing agent in the middle of that bullpen. They need a late inning reliever to combine with Diaz. If Diaz is going to take the ninth inning role, who's taking the eighth inning role? So there are players in that bullpen I already like. I've on record I've said I really enjoy Budo coming out of that bullpen. Daniel Nunez was, I thought, terrific in the limited time that we saw him. Of course, he had some injury issues, but Nunez was really impressive in the middle relief for them. And then, there's obviously other relievers that they still have, like Huascar Brazoban is still an option for them. No word if they're going to pick up Brazoban's arbitration, and if they're going to try and re-sign him and keep him in there. I think they will, just because they did make a big point of trading for him in the offseason, so that is something to consider. Not in the offseason, at midseason trade deadline, they acquired him, but that is something to consider, bringing him in. I don't know if that's a guarantee that Brazoban will be back, but particularly because he had so much trouble when he did arrive here, and finished the year with a 5.14 ERA. So great, not great numbers. Reed Garrett was a dependable, for the most part, force for them. I would probably bank on him being back in the middle relief role also, and that's pretty much it. Like, they don't have a lot of options right now in that bullpen in terms of people that they want to bring back or people that they still have. So figure in those guys, probably one or two, maybe three even relievers brought in. So let's say Diaz, Garrett, Budo, Nunez, and Brazoban. That's 5 guys. You want a bullpen of 8, one long reliever. Let's tap in Tyler McGill in that long relief role. And then for your middle relief, I said already, AJ Minter would be my number one option for them to grab a great left-handed reliever. If not him, then Tanner Scott. But either one of those guys would do a great job, I think. And then for right-hander, there's a few options that are available still. I would look at Tommy Conley, most recently on the New York Yankees last year. He was really good for them, and should command a pretty reasonable contract. But I really liked what I saw from Conley. He looked like a dependable right-handed reliever, especially in late-inning relief situations. So bringing him in. And then there is, of course, still the option for that bullpen. If the Clay Holmes experiment does fail for the starting rotation, and the Mets have to pivot and throw him back into the bullpen, I'm totally okay with it. Holmes, very effective reliever. I know Yankees fans were frustrated with him with there were some blown saves and situations like that, but Holmes was overall a very good reliever and with terrific stuff. So I wouldn't be opposed to him going back into the bullpen if they needed to play that card. So far, they are still committed to the starting rotation bit. We'll see how long that goes or how successful he is in that role. But if they do have to throw him back into the bullpen, it's far from the worst plan B. Holmes, really good pitcher. The last thing I wanted to talk about was OMG, namely Candelita himself, Mr. Jose Iglesias, and what's going to happen here. So as of yet, there is still no word as to whether or not Iglesias will be back. We are waiting to see what happens. For Iglesias, it was an unbelievable season, and we really cannot. I cannot describe how important he was. He was arguably the second most important player on this team after Lindor, which is absurd. He played like 85 games but had the greatest season of his entire career. And Iglesias has had a long career. He's played on a lot of teams. He was even an all-star at one point. And this was the best season of his career by far. He finished with a 3.0 WAR again in like 85 games. That's insane. Batted career high was it 337, and those are unbelievable numbers. I mean, he had just from an offensive and defensive both sides of it, he was incredible, and I'm looking for them to reward him because besides what he did on the field, it was what he did off the field that really blew up this team. I think, in a way, he really gave this team an identity. Having him do, bringing in that OMG song, bringing in the OMG sign, all of it was just so important for us to create an identity for ourselves in 2024. And in 2025, it's going to be a little bit different because not all the same people are coming back. But the one that they absolutely should bring back is Jose Iglesias. Iglesias has to be by far after Soto and after Minaya would be the most important bring back for the Mets. I mean, signing him would set this team up very nicely as just having him as a utility infielder. I'm not even sure he would need to be a starter. But let's say that Alonso is gone, for example, if they cannot re-sign him, and the Mets have to go forward with their plan, which is move Vientos over to first base. You have a third base hole right there, and do you try bring Brett Beatty back up? Do you try maybe Luis Angel Acuna over at third base? Do you maybe move Jeff McNeil over to third base? They have options. None of them are really great. A backup option that wouldn't be a terrible move would be re-signing Iglesias to man the third base position should they need him to. And at the very worst, he's a utility player. He's a guy off the bench who you feel comfortable with. He's a guy you can throw in as a late game defensive replacement because no one's going to be signing Iglesias to be as a starter, most likely. He's at this age, he just turned 35. He has very little effective years left of him, if many. So why not keep him in a place where he has a great reputation, he has a great relationship with the clubhouse, a great relationship with the organization, who made him into. It really did. It made him into almost a household name. Like he became synonymous, and his song obviously, with the New York Mets in 2024. So to take him out of there would kind of strip the team of its identity, and that 2024 team is going to go down as one of the most important teams in the history of the franchise. I have no doubt of that. Like it will go down as maybe the third or fourth most important team ever in the history of the New York Mets, and for what they accomplished, a lot of it relied on Iglesias, who came up with 1,000 million gajillion clutch hits for them over that stretch. Whenever he played, he seemingly always came up with a great play defensively or a clutch hit or a game-saving defensive move. It was a lot of great things that he did. And for a veteran who was signed on a minor league deal, they weren't sure if they were going to use him or not. The way he came in and played was just amazing. So sign him back up. Iglesias and his representation are probably going to be looking for him to get a nice payday because of how well he did. I mean, it was a 3.0 WAR. let's really get that through everyone's head. It was a 3.0 WAR in just about 85 games. So basically half a season, he generated a 3.0 WAR. It was the highest WAR of his career, and he played full seasons in Detroit, Boston, all over the place. Never had a WAR that high. This would be he should get a nice payday. I think the most he ever made was a little over $6 million a season. Give him a 2-year, $10 million contract and finish it up. Get it done. If there's one thing I sometimes get frustrated with the Mets is that they sometimes take forever with negotiations. It feels like we're on round 10 or 20 with Pete Alonso and trying to get him done. And it can feel at times like they're lowballing other players whenever they're trying to acquire them, which I don't think they are. I think they set themselves very firmly at their negotiating price, and I think lots of times players are like, I'll just take more money elsewhere, that's okay. And the Mets aren't a preeminent destination yet. Even though Juan Soto chose the Mets, free agents are still not flocking to the Mets. There's already speculation that rookie Sasaki may not be coming to New York. That even though he had productive meetings with the Mets, that the Mets signing him would be considered relatively a long shot. So the Soto effect hasn't taken full effect as of yet. I don't know if the Mets have to get to a point, maybe a consecutive playoff appearance, maybe another battle for the pennant, maybe a World Series appearance before they get to that level. But as of right now, they are still not considered that level of, we are. I want to sign with that team. I want to partner my brand with that team and feel confident that they're going to take me to where I need to go, which is the World Series. So that will always be the Dodgers, and that will always be teams like the Yankees or like the San Diego Padres or the Boston Red Sox. They are always going to have their own case to be made. And the Mets are going to have to struggle to kind of identify that. Every time they've made that move, though, when they've gone out and acquired a big name like a Soto, like a Lindor, like a Pedro Martinez, like a Carlos Beltran, every time they do that, it does generate attention and it does generate interest from other free agents, but it takes a little while. It's not like a one-step process. It's over the course of a couple of years. So if I don't think they're going to have that kind of, get me there. I'm telling my agent to get me there immediately. They don't have that kind of pull yet. They don't have that kind of reputation, but it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with the Vladimir Guerrero situation, because Vladimir Guerrero going to be free agent after next year, and it's going to be a very interesting situation because Guerrero will also want big money, and again, there's going to be a major bidding war most likely with the Mets, Yankees, Padres. A lot of teams are going to be interested in Guerrero, and even though the Mets have already gone out and gotten the biggest fish on the market one year, it's not guaranteed that they can get the biggest fish in the market a second year, particularly if the Mets don't perform as well as they did in 2024. So if they fall below expectations, which is not making the playoffs or being bounced in the first round, it may affect them going forward. So it is something to consider, which is the Mets need to find themselves an identity. And part of the identity is Jose Iglesias and keeping him around and keeping, which should be the spirit of 2024, around as long as possible, because that was the first thing in a long time, even more than probably the 2022 Mets, that really generated a ton of interest in the Mets, in not just New York City, but also across the MLB landscape. All of a sudden, a lot of attention was being paid, and it was being paid to this team who was, being colorful, flashy, holding a big OMG sign and singing the song, and it became their trademark. It became their brand. And Jose Iglesias, I mean, theoretically they could do it without Iglesias. I don't know what the rights situation is with that song or with the sign, all that stuff. But with Iglesias, it just feels more right. So get that done. Bring back Candelita. Bring back OMG. Bring back Jose Iglesias to the New York Mets. And let's complete this offseason in a nice way by bringing back one of the most important players that we've ever had. Thank you for listening to Mike's Mets Podcast. If you haven't already, please follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave a like and a comment, it helps so much. Finally, please follow our Twitter and Blue Sky pages. You can find us at Twitter at Mike's Mets Pod, all one word, and on Blue Sky at Mike's Mets Podcast.bsky.social. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day or evening, and let's go Mets.